Hey kids, this is Ivan. It's day 13 of RPG A Day 2021, Friday the 13th. And the word I chose out of the list was improvise. And this, I'm not sure how many takes I am into this video because things keep happening, like my cat's interrupting me. And so I'm improvising as I actually make this video. And so sometimes these videos are not quite as good or as cogent as my blog posts. So I will link the blog post below. And generally every day I have the blog post linked. Sometimes it's on the same topic, sometimes it's not. Today it actually is. But anyhow, I digress. I always talk about this or that or the other thing being one of the greatest things about role-playing games, but improvising is one of them. It makes it so that we don't know what's going to happen. Not only are we improvising, but our friends around the table are improvising. The dice are giving us cues and to improvise against, that sort of thing. So we literally end up playing to find out. Maybe we intentionally play to create something, but either way, we improvise. And, my friends and I talk about this an awful lot, about all the nuances of improvisation. Anthony, also known as Runeslinger, he talks an awful lot about preparing to improvise, doing your prep, having kind of a firm foundation to improvise against. You don't need to improvise those things in the moment, like, what's happening, the scenario, the names of the NPCs, the game world reality, if you will. And instead you can play just as much or like the players play. You can assume the roles of different characters. You can improvise what they do. You can improvise what happens, what might happen in cases like that. And as opposed to just kind of making everything up out of thin air. And that's very, very helpful. That's the way I like to do it more often than not. Although one can certainly just choose to make things up as a game master as you go along. Eloy also talked today, and today being the 12th, really, as I record this. He talked this morning about this subject and about the trap that sometimes we fall into where, like, as game masters, we kind of get used to the same sort of tropes, the same ideas, or we kind of, we have a limited supply of ideas and things we normally do, and it gets to be a little bit predictable. And we can fall into a rut that way. And there's some things to help us out with that. He mentioned, and which I've used, things like the Oracle. Now, it could just be the dice, could be random tables. It could be something that, constrains you, but also gives you prompts. Okay, well, here's your choices now. I'm bringing them in different directions than you might normally have done. And that's a really cool thing to kind of give your improvisation a jump start. It's easy to get stuck in the same kind of rut as a player. We all know, the person just plays one character. And sometimes you sit there and look at yourself and say, oh gosh, I'm really only playing a handful of character types. And you branch off a little bit. The other thing that Eloy brought up, which I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with, is the idea that like you gain inspiration from each other. You see what other people do. Maybe they're stuck in a rut too, but maybe they're doing different things than you're doing, and so you kind of cross-pollinate, get ideas from each other. And that is really, really helpful. Of course, you can play in those sorts of games which are much more collaborative, where everybody's kind of improvising all at once, and that can lead things in different directions. It certainly can fall in the same trap, where you start to come up with the same things over and over again, even as individuals and even as a group. But there's ways out of that. All caveats aside, though, improvisation is fantastic. It's one of the great things about role-playing. Especially when we're all responding to each other, we're listening, we're paying attention to what's actually happening in the moment. We see what the other people do. We're informed by things like the dice, like something like Fantasy Flight game Star Wars dice, which kind of like constrain you but give you some ideas. A bunch of other mechanics do something like that. And just paying attention to the situation, what's actually happening. And then, once we have some kind of foundation to improvise against, when we're kind of constrained and given some guidance in some way, that structure can very often set us free to improvise in a much more natural way. And that's one of the things I like, one of the ways I like to play, and one of the things I find the most satisfying, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know what somebody else is going to say, what somebody else is going to do, and very often you walk away from the session saying, no, I never thought that would happen. Couldn't have predicted it. Improvisation yields some pretty interesting results. Have a good one, kids.